Please welcome Chad Williams, former U.S. Navy SEAL, an American hero.
All right. Thank you. Well, it is a huge honor and privilege to be here with you all. As you heard, I'm from California, but I'd say I'd probably self-identify as one of those deplorables, so everything's going to be okay here, I think. Former U.S. Navy SEAL. I imagine most of you in the room probably know what a Navy SEAL is, but there was a time back home in Cali where a girl asked me if I worked at SeaWorld or something. Maybe you all didn't know that SEAL is actually an acronym, though, and it stands for our areas of operation, sea, air, and land. To kind of give you an idea of what my team was doing on land on the last deployment I was involved in, out in Iraq, we were given the task of hunting down men that make suicide vests and there's roadside bombs, IEDs. And while we're out there, we're working with a group called the ISOF, that's the Iraqi Special Operations Forces. And one of our goals with these guys is to teach them how to fight their own fights. And so the best way to do that is not only train them on base, but actually go outside the wire and fight side by side with them. Well, if you can imagine a whole deployment going by, I'd say pretty good, because we bagged and gagged some bad dudes, we're making the world a better place, and coming up on what looked like just enough time on the calendar to do maybe one more operation. We weren't really sure if the ISOF was ready for us to pass the baton off to them, so we decided for this final operation, why don't we try and make it a sort of graduation operation? We'll let them plan the whole thing from the ground up, and we'll be there with them just in case things go bad. So they start from scratch. They need some intel. They're hitting the streets, and they find this source of information that tells them about a man that's an Iraqi policeman. So they find this guy, it's a policeman by day, but at night, back home, come to find out he's one of these bomb makers that we're looking for. And to kind of give you an idea of the type of characters that make a suicide vest, oftentimes these guys are not even motivated to actually strap it on themselves. In fact, they have such a difficult time finding somebody else to volunteer to put one of these things on that in one instance over there, this just shows how depraved and wicked they are. They took two mentally handicapped women and strapped these vests onto them, shoving them off into a crowded marketplace as they watch from a distance, setting it off with the remote, killing these women and obviously so many more. So it kind of gives you an idea of the type of characters that we're up against. But the ISOF, they've got this guy's number. They figured out where he lives. They've got this whole plan, how they want to approach the house, get in, grab this guy, extract him. Everything's looking pretty good. And they mention one other thing. They say, hey, look, you SEALs, you get shot at more than we do. And we think we figured out why. And so we're kind of curious what they thought it was, and they say, it's the color of your uniforms. I'm like, really, the color of our uniforms? Not the way we shoot, move, and communicate. You think it comes down to the mere color of a uniform? They're like, yeah, so we were wondering if for this final operation, you'd be willing to maybe take off your American-colored uniforms, and we got a pile of ISOF uniforms for you guys to put on. It's like, all right, you want us to put those on to get shot at more with you? And they're like, yeah. It's like, fine, it's final operation. It's not really the uniform. It's the way we shoot, move, communicate, but whatever. So we get these uniforms on. Well, the funny thing is, my dark complexion, start growing out a little facial hair, then get on one of these Iraqi uniforms. I've got that thing on, and I'm looking around, and to be honest, I'm like, man, I really blend in with these fellas around here now. On this final operation, I'm standing up in the Humvee. It's a section called the turret, and I'm behind the .50 caliber machine gun, and for those of you that don't know, that's a weapon that could really reach out and touch somebody. I've got my night vision goggles on, I'm looking through my green little world and just kind of going over this mental inventory as all of these checks are firing off in my mind, the things that I know. I know that my weapon is headspace and time, that means it's ready to go. I know where this guy lives, I know how we're getting in, I know how we're getting out. But one unique thing I know about this operation that's going to make it different than every other operation, I know that this is the final operation. Which also means I know just a matter of days from now, I'm going to be back home, Southern California, surfing in the ocean. But here's what none of us really knew about that night, was that we were actually being set up the entire time to get thrown in the absolute worst circumstances we'd been in on this entire deployment. As we're being set up on an ambush, and we find ourselves engaging in this gun battle really for our lives. Now, before I touch on how that all turned out, I want to backtrack just a little bit and share with you part of my road to becoming a SEAL. Fresh out of high school, just attending a local community college, I finally came up with this idea that this is what I want to do. I want to be a Navy SEAL. And my dad, being a good dad, he wanted to put that to the test. And so he says, hey, joining the military, son, not like anything you've ever done in the past, like playing ball, skateboarding, going to a local community college. Like, if you go and suppose you don't make it through SEAL training, or suppose you quit SEAL training, there's no just getting out. You will be in the military and probably going to be chipping paint off some boat in Japan if you don't make it through. I understand. And so I'm preparing. I'm getting ready. And as days go by, he invites me back into the house. And he says, all right, you really want to do this? You want to be a SEAL? Yeah, Dad, I want to be a SEAL. He goes, great. I set up a workout for you with the Navy SEAL. Check out my computer screen. I'll never forget looking over at the computer, and I'm thinking, my dad doesn't know any Navy SEALs. Like, what is this about? And there's a little one-liner in this email. It just says, can Chad come out and play tomorrow? I'm looking, like, play? Like, Dad, let me get this straight. You met some guy off the internet that says he wants to play with me, and you're arranging this now? And he's like, no, son, this guy's a SEAL. I'm like, Dad, you can't just trust everything somebody tells you on the web. He's saying he's a SEAL. All right, I'll go meet up with the guy. Well, as it turns out, there's more of a conversation my dad had with this guy on the phone prior to that email that I had no clue about at the time, but I'll give you the backstory up front. It's better this way. So he gets on the phone with this SEAL, and he says, hey, look, my son, he wants to be a Navy SEAL. But the thing is, he has no idea what he's getting himself involved in. And so I'm wondering if you could just do me a real big favor. Would you meet up with my son? And what I'm asking you to do is I want you to crush him. Just bury him. Beat this desire of becoming a SEAL out of him. So after thinking about it for a while, he shoots off his reply, can Chad come out and play tomorrow? So off I go to Oceanside, California, where I'm going to meet up with this Navy SEAL. His name's Scott Helvenston. He spots me in the parking lot right away. You, Chad? Yes, sir. All right, Bubba. I was Bubba from that point forward. Get on over here. He's got me dropped down doing push-ups and sit-ups. He brought his own portable pull-up bar. He can hang from anywhere. I'm doing pull-ups outside the bathroom at the beach. And, finally he says, all right, Bubba, why don't you go for a run out into the wetlands? I'm going to catch up with you after about 15 minutes or so. I just got some gear I got to clean up. But 15 minutes of the run, I'll be there. So I take off down this trail out into the wetlands. I don't know what the final destination is, but here I go. Well, 15 minutes into the run where he should be showing up, I'm looking back, and I'm not seeing him anywhere. And I keep running, and I'm not seeing him. And I start getting this idea in my head that maybe, just maybe, I'm too fast for this Navy SEAL. He can't keep up on the run. And as I'm looking over my shoulder, again, it's just like a scene out of Terminator 2 where the bad guy, they call him the T-1000. Remember how he's in that police uniform and can like morph into knife hands and chase down that vehicle? Well, I'm looking back and that Navy SEAL like a T-1000 coming down this trail for me, right? There's nothing I could do to keep that distance. He closes the gap, catches right up to where I am, and I never saw what was coming next. As he gets just ahead of me, stops and turns on a dime, and I'm greeted by his fist, just impaling my stomach. And I still remember the feeling of just being clotheslined, going for a ride. That wind knocked out of me, my back hitting the ground, poof of dirt up all around me. And remember, you got to put yourself in my shoes for a moment here. At the time, the only intel I had was this. Some guy my dad met off the internet, he's got me on the ground in the wetlands now. I'm thinking child predator, like this is happening right now. He's on top of me, just ragdolling me, screaming, going ballistic. But then I hear these words. He says, you want to be a Navy SEAL? You better stay 3 paces behind me. And that's when it hit me, like this is it, and this is for real. If I quit right now, I'll forever be a quitter. I knew the way I respond in this moment is going to affect the trajectory of the rest of my life. And so I just reaffirmed this initial attitude that I started with, I'm going to die before I quit. So he gets up and just takes off down this trail. This goes on for a handful of miles. And I'll just say, looking back in hindsight, after having gone through SEAL training, I'll look back and say this was by far the most difficult singular workout, or I should say beatdown session, this encounter with Scott Helvenston. But I finally get to a point where he circles up, and he's pacing back and forth, and he's looking at me like he wants to fight me, like an MMA cage fighter waiting for the referee to say the words, let's get it on. And at the time, I'm this teenage skater punk kid. I don't want to project to the Navy SEAL that I'm willing to fight him at all. So I remember having this sort of self-dialogue as I look over at him. I'm thinking, okay, Chad, no direct eye contact. You don't want to set this guy off. Just use your peripherals, right? Don't look him in the eyes. And so he breaks this very awkward tension by asking me, he says, hey, if you would have gone another mile or two, would you have stayed with me? And I told him, Scott, I'll die before I quit. Well, he loosens up, completely changes his demeanor, goes, great, hey, you want to meet up again for another workout tomorrow? I'm kind of thinking like, are we going to address that flashback you had on the trail, pal? Like, what was that about? But what I didn't know is that this is a whole big setup. And so I just agree, I'll meet up again, yeah, sure. And so I'm going home, and apparently he's calling my dad, tells him, look, I know what you want me to do. I gave it a go. but I think your son might have what it takes to make it. I'd like to start working with him. So from that day forward, I began to meet up with this extraordinary Navy SEAL, Scott Helvenston. And I say extraordinary because this is a man that is a SEAL above other SEALs. He has all kinds of records. He's the youngest man to ever make it through SEAL training. He completed it at the age of 17 years old. That was only possible because he grew up in over 20 different foster homes. He's a world champion pentathlete. He is the fastest Navy SEAL on the SEAL training obstacle course. And one more record for you. You might recognize him from a TV program called Man vs. Beast, where he was the only man to beat the beast on the TV program. He raced a chimpanzee through an obstacle course and pulled ahead of the monkey on the monkey bars. It's true. I'm not making it up. Navy SEAL versus chimpanzee. Google it. I get to spend a lot of time with him as he's preparing me, investing into me. He's being the servant leader in my life, just getting me ready to make it, and he's got me prepared. So I sign up. I've got a date. It's set. I'm going to be shipping off to boot camp. I remember Scott, he tells me, you know, Junior, because eventually I moved on in life. I was Bubba for a while, but eventually I became Junior. He really took me under his wing. He was like a second father to me. He says, all right, Junior, you know, I'm thinking about taking this opportunity of going overseas again. It's only going to be a couple months long. He's kind of teetering on whether or not he wanted to do it, and he ends up deciding he's going to do it. I get a phone call from him, and he says, all right, I'm about to go do this thing, referring to going to Iraq. And he's just telling me that the timeline and just reminding me that he's going to be back in time to see me make it. And he says, I want you to know something I've never told anybody I've ever trained before. He says, I know you're going to make it through SEAL training. And so you can imagine just being in my shoes, what he means to me and what those words mean. I'm excited. I'm expectant. I'm looking forward. And so he's just saying, hey, I'm going to be back in time. We're going to see you make it through. So we get off the phone. We say our goodbyes. Can't wait to see you when you get back, Scott. So he's gone off in Iraq. I'm days away from just getting this journey started, going to boot camp. And I remember turning on a television one day as I'm just getting the day started. And I look over at the screen. I can't believe what I see on the screen. First, it's a picture of Scott smiling. And I'm thinking, what's Scott doing on TV? He didn't let me know he's going to be on TV for something. It's a typical profile shot they use before they introduce somebody onto a program. And so I'm just thinking, I thought he was out in Iraq right now. And I'm looking at this smiling image of him, and then I see in the lower third of the screen Scott's birth date, followed by a dash. And it says March 31st, 2004. And before I could process in my mind, translate what that means, this still image of Scott changes to video footage. And very similar to what you see groups like ISIS doing today, where they have these premeditated attacks, these beheadings, but they videotape it, or setting a Jordanian pilot on fire, but they want to spread this footage around as a sort of a scare tactic. I'm looking at this footage now as it's Scott and three other Americans in Fallujah, Iraq, as their vehicle's burning in the background. And it keeps cutting to these different scenes as they're lifeless. This angry Iraqi mob, they have sticks and rods, and they're just beating, wailing away, trying to mutilate their bodies. Then they find rope, and they wrap it around their legs, hook them up to a vehicle. They go dragging them through the streets of Fallujah like it's a celebration, a parade to them. They get to the Euphrates River Bridge, string them upside down, and then they set their bodies on fire. And they begin to chant over and over in Arabic, looking into a camera. They have a message for us in America. They say, Fallujah's the graveyard of Americans. Fallujah's the graveyard of Americans. I think pretty needless to say, I'll never have the words to describe what all the surrounding events were like. It just radically changes you. You don't go forward the same person from there. And there is a takeaway here that has to do with dealing with adversity. In the SEAL teams, part of our SEAL creed is we are forged by adversity. In the end, you can't really determine the adversity you're going to face in life. It's outside circumstances that come creeping in, so you don't get to customize it. But what's the one thing that you do have a grip on? The one thing you have controlling influence over, if you think about it, is how you respond. You determine whether or not that adversity is going to be a wing or a weight in your life. Will it be a weight that just sinks you, leaves you knocked down, never to get back up again? Or are you going to find a way to find a wing in there somehow, to rise to the occasion, to be fortified? And so when we lose somebody, what do? Typically, we will go back to that last conversation, the last time we were with them, and you go over it. What did we talk about? And I remember where Scott tells me, he says, Junior, I know you're going to make it through SEAL training. For me, that became my wing right there. That's what really forged me through that adversity. I became that much more determined that I am going to do this, but I want to do it for so much more now. I really understand the price of our freedom, that it's not free, it's paid for in the currency of our soldiers' blood on the battlefield. That was one of those things that really matured me right there. Bringing it back around to that final operation, I remember passing a sign in Iraq, and it says in Arabic, Fallujah, Iraq. And it's one of the last big signs you see before you go turning in to that town. And it dawned on me, I don't know how many times we passed it before, but it hit me for the first time on this last stop. I wonder if Scott looked at that same exact sign before he turned in. Little did he know, what was about to happen that night. And little did we know that we were being set up on this ambush that night. I wish I had time to hit the details of how, that night played out, but obviously I stand here before you alive. What I really want to emphasize with these final moments that I have with you, though, is that it doesn't always work out that way, does it? So we must remember that our freedoms are not free, but paid for in the currency of our soldiers' blood on the battlefield. And I think that we fortify our freedoms by keeping that at the forefront of our mind. In our SEAL Creed, it says, in the worst of conditions, I will rely upon the legacy of those who have gone before me to steady my resolve, to guide my every deed. How do you push forward through tough times, adversity? We look back at the legacy of others. If we're going to go on an operation and maybe we're told all of you might not come home alive tonight, how do you get your mind off of self and focus on the mission at hand? We reflect on the legacy of those who have gone before us. Maybe the assault leader gets up and retells the story. Hey, remember Mike Mansour. Mike Mansour is a U.S. Navy SEAL. When he's on top of a roof in Ramadi, Iraq, he's providing cover for other SEALs that are out on the road. When from an unknown location, an insurgent comes running up to that rooftop, throws a hand grenade up there. It hits Mikey right in the chest. And if you can imagine, he had an exit just a step away as this thing falls into the dark. He could have saved himself, no problem. But here's the catch, is that there's other SEALs that were on that roof with him, and they didn't have time to get to their feet and pass that grenade. And so Mikey, in a split-second, selfless act, his final words to these guys was grenade, telling them to take cover, as he threw himself over the top of this grenade, covering it himself, and he absorbed the blast. He took that shrapnel, that metal, upon himself, but because of what he did, these other guys on the roof, they all lived. And so mark these words down in history, folks. Greater love has no one than one that lays down his life for his friends. Remember my friend Scott, one of the last things he ever said to me was, Junior, when I go over there, perhaps I can make a difference. And so looking back, for the longest time, I didn't want to talk about it, frankly, because it's difficult. But at the same time, I realized that I have his story to share. And he lives on through the retelling of that story. And I'm reminded about how precious these freedoms are that we have based off of the life that he sacrificed. And so although he was killed and dragged through these streets and hung upside down from that bridge, it wasn't in vain. One of the last things, he says, perhaps I can make a difference. Greater love is no one than this one that lays down his life for his friends. And then kind of bringing it all together here, one other legacy to look upon would be the man who spoke those words of greater love. That's a quote, and it comes from none other than Jesus of Nazareth. And I want to bring another perspective to you. Maybe you've never thought about what he did at the cross this way. But let guys like Mike Mansour and Scott Helvinson help you to understand those words and help you to understand what took place that day in Calvary. That just as Mikey absorbed the blast of a grenade upon himself so others could live, think about the fact that this Jesus of Nazareth, he didn't absorb the blast of a hand grenade, but he absorbed the wrath that we deserve upon himself. And why did he do that? So that we could live on with him in eternity. Remember, that grenade was never Mikey's problem. It was the other guys that were in trouble, but he took it upon himself, sacrificing himself to provide freedom and life for these others. Never forget that this Jesus of Nazareth, he never had the same problems that we did in terms of sinful, shameful life, but he absorbed that upon himself so that we could live on freely. And as my friend Scott killed and hung from that Euphrates River bridge, ultimately I would say, for freedom's sake, let's never forget that this Jesus of Nazareth, he was killed and he was hung from that cross of Calvary for freedom's sake. So greater love has no one than this one that lays down his life for his friends. You can see it in men like Mike Mansour and Scott Helvinston, and look to the cross. That's the proper perspective of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And so to me, those words carry double significance. Our soldiers shed their blood for our temporal freedom, and the Savior has shed his blood for our eternal freedom. One of the things these instructors let you do when you're going through SEAL training and you're about to enter into the most difficult part of training, which is called Hell Week, they want you to write on the inside of your hat, and they want you to write things that are going to get you to dig deep when the going gets tough. And the one thing I never saw written on the inside of anybody's hat that made it was their own name. And, we're in a time now where people are so narcissistic, and you ask them when they set up to do a goal or an achievement, why do you want to do this? Sometimes the answer is, I'm doing this one for me this time. And it's so sad to hear that because you know that's not going to be enough. Nobody that made it was ever looking at their own name on their hat. All right, chatty boy, I'm doing this one for you, you know. You got to reach outside of yourself, something bigger, something greater. And so the common theme that I saw written on the inside of hats that for guys that made it, this is the theme right here. It was faith, family, and friends. That's exactly what I had on the inside of my hat. I had a scripture, obviously I'm a man of faith. I had the word family on the inside of my hat. I had my friend, Scott Helvinson, his name on the inside of my hat. I had my girlfriend's name on the inside of my hat, and I still have the hat, and it's a little awkward to break out in front of my wife nowadays because I'm just kidding. I married her. It's Aubrey, so I get to keep the hat. Faith, family, and friends, those are the things inside of the hat. I guess with these final 12 seconds that I have left here, I'd like to challenge you with something. Before you leave this place and go back to your respective sphere of influence, have it determined in your mind, what is it that you would write on the inside of your hat? God bless you guys. God bless America. Thank you so much for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please welcome Jeff Hunt, the chairman of the Western Conservative Summit.